الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله ومن والاه. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. So he says on 68, Seerah AbdulAziz al-Lamati, وكان قادرا على التدمير لو شاء لكن جاد بالتأخير. The Prophet ﷺ was capable of wreaking havoc upon them had he wished. Instead, he generously gave them respite. The Prophet ﷺ, when Sayyidina Umar became Muslim and he began to really become more strengthened in Medina, in Mecca, the Quraysh became very aggressive. And one of the things that they did, and it was mostly at the instigation of Abu Jahl, was to create a type of sanction on the Prophet ﷺ. And because the Prophet and his family went into the shi'b of Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, they basically decided to sanction the Abu Talib, the whole family of Bani Hashim. And Hashim, as you know, Hashim is the brother of Muttalib. So the Muttalibi and the Hashimi were both sanctioned. And these were the two. All of the Quraysh are related at some point. Like Abu Bakr is a Taymi. His father was Taym, and Taym was the son of Murrah. So when you look, that's why like Kilab is the Prophet ﷺ's ancestor, who was the son of Murrah. Murrah had Kilab and Taym is the grandfather of Abu Bakr. So the Prophet and Abu Bakr become related at Murrah. That's the grandfather that they share. This is true of all of the Quraysh. At some point, if you go back to Mudar, they all have some relationship. And that's why the Arabs had a very strong sense of kinship bonds. Now there was a man, Hakim ibn Hizam, who was the paternal nephew of Khadija. And he was sneaking food in. And he was seen to be doing that. And there was an altercation. And then basically they conspired, a group of the Quraysh, to break the sanction because they knew it was wrong. And this is the thing about the wrongdoers. Wrongdoers love nothing more than violent resistance because what it enables them to do is justify their wrongdoing. They feel good about doing their wrong. That's why nonviolent resistance is such. When you don't have parity, obviously if you have parity, there's no need for a nonviolent resistance. When you have the ability to defend yourself, you defend yourself. But when you don't have the ability to defend yourself, the best way to defend yourself is to resist without resistance, nonviolently. Because the evildoer, it's very hard for people to harm people unjustly, unless they're really evil people, but those people are actually a minority. Most of the people that actually implement these things suffer greatly, which is why in America, for instance, Vietnam, so many of the homeless are Vietnam vets, drug addicts came out of the Vietnam War, and the same is happening now in Iraq, because people can't do the things that modern soldiers are called to do without suffering greatly inside. So this is what was happening to some of these Quraysh. They were actually really bothered by this sanction. And the example there of Hakim ibn Hizam, he was sneaking food in. This was his aunt. Khadija, and he knew it was wrong. So they went, and they had written this in a sahifa that they would do this. And the Prophet told Abu Talib that the sahifa was already gone, wasn't even in the Kaaba anymore, because some termites had eaten it. So when they met in the Kaaba, they were one group said, one man got up and said, we should end the sanction. Abu Jahl said, no, not ending the sanction. And then each one who had conspired, they all started getting up and saying, no, we're going to end the sanction. And he ended up becoming the minority voice. So even though it lasted, he says it probably lasted 2 to 3 years, the sanction, 2.5 years. I mean, there's different narrations. But the point being is that this was a very incredibly difficult time. They were eating leaves from trees. So this was a very difficult time for the Prophet ﷺ and his followers. And obviously, Habasha helped, because a group of the Sahaba went to the land of Ethiopia, and the Prophet ﷺ said that it's a land that's ruled by a just ruler. And he was a Christian ruler, which indicates also that there is justice in places that are not necessarily implementing the Sharia of Allah. That's something a lot of Muslims don't understand. That justice, there's two types. Raghib al-Isbahani says there's two types of justice: adala muttaqa and adala muqayyada. Adala muttaqa is agreed upon by human beings. It's those universals that we all agree upon. Adala muqayyada are things that are constrained by revelation. So if you want a Western understanding of this, in Western legal theories, they have what's called natural law theory. This was the common denominator of most Western legal tradition until the mid-20th century. Before the mid-20th century, almost all of the great legal minds of the West believed in natural law theory. They believed that there was an inherent human understanding of right and wrong. And during the Enlightenment, these people believed this. People like John Locke and things like this. These were natural law theorists. In the 20th century, you had a positivistic movement, which said that law is just human convention. It's just things humans agree on, and there's no real absolute standard. But what they use as their standard is what's called utilitarianism, which is the greatest good for the greatest number. I mean, that's basically the foundation now of most Western law, is this idea. We Muslims believe in natural law. We believe that there's a fitrah in people, and that the fitrah is substantiated by revelation. But the fitrah is the basis, which is why people, and this is a khilaf amongst the mutakallimun. Some of them say people will be responsible for natural law. And the Ash'ari, which is the dominant opinion, says no, they won't. It won't be taken into account. The Maturidiyya say the intellect is enough to give human beings responsibility for their actions. To some degree, like in universals, like killing, murder, theft, things like that. But in the details of the Sharia, the intellect doesn't really have access to it. So that's where you get the idea of adala muqayyada, is what, like for instance, the dress code in Islam is not something that it's not worked out by the intellect. Humans, for some reason, which is a fitra thing, tend to cover at least the sawatan. You won't find, even in the most aboriginal cultures, you will not find people completely naked. They always cover the sawatan. And the sawatan are basically the genitals and the anus. It's not even the buttocks, the crease of the buttocks. It's the genitals and the anus, which is why you'll find aboriginal tribes in like Amazon who have a little covering over their front genitals and a string in the back. So their buttocks might be exposed, but they do still cover that. That is, by Sharia, the bare minimum of covering the aura. And once you take that off, khalas. You and the animals are the same. So the more people are in a fitra state, the less they need for covering over. The more degraded humans get, the more they need to protect their own dignity, human dignity. It's an important point. That's why the ancient peoples, they had a fitra about they didn't need to cover in the same way that the later people needed to cover. So that's something that the Sharia differs, it changes. The dress code for Sharia will change over time. But in the last phase of humans, the dress code is what we've been given. This is our belief, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put a set of standard for dress. And that's why people ask, in the West, when they ask you, about the hijab, the West has a hijab. People are not walking around naked. For some Muslims say, yes, they are, but they're not. They're covering their bodies to some degree. What we're going to differ on is what is the hijab. So the idea of adala mutlaqa is that humans should cover something, which is why it's illegal to go completely naked even in Western countries. You can't just walk around naked. So there is a hijab, but it's the degree to which the hijab. That's where the aql doesn't really have any real absolute say in the matter. So it's important just to really understand that that there's justice outside of Islam, which is why we are allowed to transact with non-Muslims. We can go enter into agreements. We can do business with them because we know that they accept standards of justice. We accept standards of justice, and it's not necessarily from the Sharia, but it's from the idea of law. Every society has a legal concept. So the Prophet ﷺ sent them to Habasha and said that there's a just system there, that the ruler is just. And he was. The Negus was a just ruler, Najashi. The Quraysh tried to go, Amr ibn al-As, tried to go and create trouble, but the Prophet ﷺ's followers knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to talk appropriately. They didn't attack the Najashi. They didn't tell him, you're not a true Christian and Christianity's been altered. They were very diplomatic, and so this was the time that the Prophet ﷺ was really having a difficult time. But despite that, and what he's saying here is he did not imprecate against them. Some of the Sahaba came to him and they said, please make a dua against these people. Now we know that, like at Ta'if, the Prophet ﷺ was actually given the opportunity to make a prayer against the people, and he was told that they would be destroyed. But he did not. The Prophet ﷺ did not do that. He always asked for their guidance. Even when they came, one of the Sahaba coming back from Yemen, he was sent to call Dos, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, qad aba Dos. They refused the da'wah, fad'u alayhim. And this is in al-Bukhari, and the Prophet ﷺ, it said that he turned towards the Qibla, raised his hands, and they thought, فَظَنَّ النَّاسِ أَنَّهُ سَيَدْعُو عَلَيْهِمْ. They thought that he would imprecate against Dos. And he said, Allahumma ahdi Dos and wa'ati bihim. Oh Allah, guide Dos and bring them to me. And sure enough, they ended up becoming Muslim. And Abu Huraira is one of them. So they were latecomers. Abu Huraira comes 2.5 years before the Prophet ﷺ departed, but they came, and he made the same dua for Thaqif and others. So they were asked him, make dua against them. Even at Uhud, when he was asked to imprecate against them, he said, Allahumma ahdi qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, guide my people because they don't know what they're doing. And that is traditionally an ishkal. It's called an ishkal. A mushkil is something that needs resolution, some type of resolution with the ulama. How do we resolve this problem? Because the fact that in one riwayah, he said, Allahumma aghfir qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, forgive my people because they don't know. the idea that they don't know is actually very Socratic, because what Socrates said was that nobody who does evil knowingly. In other words, it's really a state of heedlessness, because if they really, really understood what they were doing, they wouldn't do it. If they really knew the metaphysical implications of the action, they wouldn't do it. So in essence, that was, to me, that's what the Prophet ﷺ was indicating, is that they really don't know who I am. Because if they really knew who I was, they would not do this. Now, the reality of it is the majority of them became Muslim, which is what's so extraordinary. So they really didn't know. And the ones that knew, they had terrible fate. The mustahzi'un, kafaynak, and mustahzi'in. We will suffice those who mock you. And mockery is one of the only things that really the Quran just has no tolerance for, is mocking people, making fun of people. Because of what a human being is, human dignity and respect of human beings is so important in our tradition that any type of mockery of people, for whatever reasons, is seen as a very, very odious thing, very evil thing to do. So the Prophet did not, jada bit-ta'khiri, hatta hadallahu bihi man sha'a, until Allah guided among them whom He pleased, minhum wa min aslabihim abna, and from their children. And that's also important to remember. When the Prophet was asked to make dua against Ta'if, he said about Thaqif, he said, I would hope that from their children would come righteous people. Now, Raghib al-Isbahani radiallahu anhu says that there are 3 reasons why human beings were created. Most Muslims know one reason, right? Which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's 2 others that Raghib al-Isbahani mentions. Anybody? Procreation, istikhlaf, the idea of carrying on the human project. That in and of itself is part of why we're here. So we transmit the human project to those who follow us. We take it on from those who preceded us. So the istikhlaf is that alteration, that one group comes and they learn everything that went before. And this is one of the true miracles of life on earth, if you think about it. For instance, we have several doctors here. Doctors, when they study medicine, they don't have to relearn the whole thing. There's so much knowledge that their knowledge is predicated on. So they don't have to learn why the body maintains its temperature at 98.6. People had to study physiology to work out certain mechanisms, but they understand. So then they just read the thermometer or whatever, and if it's at a certain point, they know. If it gets past 105, they're in real trouble. If it gets below 94, they're in trouble. But they learn these things from much human experience in the past. That's true of all of our sciences, engineering, agriculture. If we had to relearn all of these things, what we do is the knowledge that's already been learned is transmitted, and then each generation adds to that knowledge. It adds to the knowledge. So that in and of itself is a reason for being here. And even people who are not worshiping Allah are participating in that. So they have a divine purpose. I mean, there's scientists that might not even believe in Allah, but they're helping humanity. So they're part of a divine purpose. And that's why it's very important for Muslims to understand that the Muslims are not the only thing happening on this planet. There's 6 billion people on here, and all of them are here, we believe, for a reason. And it's a divine reason. And much of it is good. So this is what the Prophet was recognizing, is that their children, good can come from their children. They might not be good people, but from their children might come good. So as long as there's children, there's hope. Because the young have that purity and innocence. And they're corrupted as time passes. So this is, and then the third one, according to Raghib Isfahani was, Imarat al-Ard is actually to cultivate the earth. The earth, if you look at a garden, one of the things about gardens, which I think is one of the things that we're so attracted to, is that gardens are natural, but there's a human hand in the garden that has enhanced the natural beauty. And so this is part of what humans do. They enhance when they're well. When they're not well, they detract. But when they're well, when the fitrah is healthy, and when there's a spiritual energy, then they enhance. And this is why when people, if they're doing real dhikr, if they have a spiritual connection, they will be beauty makers. Ihsan is the highest maqam in Islam, and ihsan literally means to make beautiful. Ahsana. Hasuna, yahsunu, is what they call غير متعدي. It's an intransitive form. The mudamman is intransitive in Arabic. It's something that doesn't take a direct object. It's in and of itself. So you say sharufa yashrufu, he is noble. There's no object of that. It's an intrinsic reality. So the same is true. Hasuna yahsunu is, it is beautiful. It is good. It is hasan. It's something pleasing. It's something beautiful. The hasanat are good deeds because good deeds are beautiful. And this is there's an ethical theory that is actually an American ethicist, Chisholm, who said that that essentially what ethics is it's a branch of aesthetics. His view was it was actually ethics was a branch of aesthetics, which is about the philosophy of beauty, why things are beautiful. He thought that actions, good actions, were actually things that we recognized the intrinsic beauty of the action, which is why it was so pleasing to us. In the same way, when you look at a mountain or a tree or a lake, you recognize, you're a beauty recognizer. That's what humans are. And they also recognize ugliness, which is why when you go to Mecca and then you come to Medina, and there's an aesthetic difference between the two cities that's quite striking. Mecca historically was a very beautiful city, but it hasn't for some reason had the same aesthetic protection that Medina has. So when you come and you look at the masjid and what's around it, it's pleasing to the eye in a way that Mecca has lost something because of that. We have that inherent ability to do that. The more healthy your soul is, the more sensitive you will be to that type of beauty. Now, obviously, there's a decadent awareness of aesthetics, which is a whole other thing. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about fitrah. There's a type of effete aesthetics where somebody, when you get into very, very corrupt civilization, people become obsessed with a kind of ornateness, a Baroque type of, where it's actually not healthy. It becomes something else. The real beauty tends to have very simple principles inherent. And that's why the closer the fitrah is, the closer they are to that that real beauty. Even if you look in the Prophet ﷺ's masjid, if you look at the actual current masjid, that was built in the 1840s after a fire, already heavily influenced by late European architecture. So if you'll notice, there's a lot of Baroque ornamentation, which is quite surprising. But that's very late. That's a European influence on the masjid, because the masjid was already, the Ottomans were already heavily, during Abdul-Majid, his khilafah, they were already heavily influenced. It was the time of the Tanzimat and real European influence. You see this in Ottoman influence. You'll see this in Morocco. If you go to Morocco, you'll also see the Andalusian effect. The early Moroccan period, the period of the Murabitin, the Muwahidin, the architecture is very, very stark, but really beautiful. But as the Andalusian influence comes in, it becomes very Baroque. Baroque, in fact, comes from Barak, which is, Barak is, if you look in the etymological dictionaries, Baroque, they say origin unknown. Some of them say it goes back to Portuguese. But I'm convinced it's from Barak, which is something, to the Arabs, Barak is like something that dazzles you. So that's from asking about that their children, that the Prophet ﷺ, all that came from asking about the children, that the purpose of what we're here. So, we're here also as beauty makers, cultivation of the earth, which is to cultivate, to enhance what God has given us. He's given us the raw material and given us the ability to enhance it. And if we're healthy, that's what we do. If we're not healthy, we detract it, which is why so much of the modern world is ugly. It's very ugly because people aren't well. So the architecture's ugly, the clothes are ugly, the hairstyles are ugly. It's just people aren't well. It's all symbolic of being spiritually unhealthy, but people are unaware of it because if they were, they wouldn't be in those states. They would be troubled by those states. But that's the human condition. So ثُمَّ أَعَزَّ دِينَهُ وَنَصَرَ وَأَيَّدَ الْحَقَّ بِهِ وَأَظْهَرَ. After that, he exalted his religion, gave it victory, strengthened the truth through him, and gave it prominence. وَأَبْطَلَ الْبَاطِلَ وَالْأَعْدَاءَ كِبْتًا وَخِزْيًا لَهُمُ الْجَزَاءَ. He vanquished falsehood and truth's enemies. Suppression and forsakenness were their reward. وأمد الحصار في الشعب على حولين أربع لا ثلاث واصرا. So the period of the sanctions upon the Prophet's neighborhood lasted over 2 years. It didn't quite reach 3. وعندما انقضى الحصار عمره 49 كان قدره. When the sanctions finally ended, his age was 49 lunar years complete. وعندما أكمل 50 سنة جن نصيبين أتته مذعنة. And after he completed 50 lunar years, the jinn of Nusaybin came to him and announced their faith. وبعد واحد مع 50 أشهر مضت له يقينا. The Prophet ﷺ, when he went to Ta'if to ask for the help, and you saw Addas, the wonderful spot there, on his way back, some jinn heard the Quran recite, إِنَّا سَمَعْنَا قُرْآنًا عَجَبًا يَهْدِي إِلَى الرُّشْدِ فَآمَنَّا بِهِ. There was a group of jinn who heard the Quran recited, and they were amazed by it, and they became Muslim. Now the jinn are basically creatures that live here with us. They occupied the earth before we did, and every culture has a tradition of the unseen creatures, sprites, leprechauns, whatever you want to call. Every culture has some concept. Poltergeist in the German tradition. If you go into Africa, there's a lot of... So all of these different cultures have an understanding that there are creatures living aside. Now there's a lot of mythology that goes with them. There's a lot of fantasy and stories. We know that in imaginative literature, Tolkien and these are all expressions of that. It's something in us that's aware that something's going on alongside all of this. We just don't know quite what it is. But that's really, and that's why there's an appeal to that. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, all that. That's all about jinn. But people don't really understand it because it's a world we don't have access to. Now, the people that have the most access to it are desert people, because desert people experience. The jinn tend to live in areas that are uninhabited. So in Mauritania, 1,001 jinn tales of people that have had real experiences with the jinn. And So the desert people are very aware of it. That's why to the Arabs, none of this was strange at all. Modern people tend to be very wary of all these things, although we have a lot of very weird things that happen that are, people don't know how to explain them, just fall under that kind of supernatural category. But there's a lot of obsession with this stuff, with ghosts and things like that in the West. So that is that group. Now they, according to our tradition, they do have the ability to change their form. So the Prophet ﷺ also indicated that sometime they enter into forms in animals. So you will see, there's one of the people here who's here. It's one of my favorite stories about her father was in a apartment, and he woke up and there was a big boa constrictor. This is in a city in the U.S. There was a big boa constrictor in his room, and can you imagine that? I would have passed out. But he said, by the Lord of Sulaiman, if you're a jinn, leave. I just thought that was so amazing, the presence of mind to be able to say something like that. But it turns out like these snakes can go into the sewage and come into people's houses through the toilets. So something to keep you up at night. But that is what the Prophet ﷺ said for the people of Medina if they came into their homes and found a big snake, to ask them to leave. If they didn't and they pose any threat, then you can kill them. But it's just a respect of that whole world that we are commanded to believe in. You have to believe in the jinn. So it's part of our aqidah that we believe, because the Quran clearly states. And jinn comes from a word, jannah, which is to be hidden or concealed. They're the concealed creatures. They have free will. They're like us. They have believers and disbelievers, and they have problems within themselves. They marry. They procreate. All these. So they heard and they believed in the message. Now, the Prophet was informed about them. And we're told that they said the shahada. So what was significant about this is that humans were rejecting his message, but the jinn weren't. So for the Prophet ﷺ, it was quite an extraordinary confirmation of what he was doing, because he was at a real low point. And this is why when he came back to Mecca at the age of 51, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him with the night journey. شَرَّفُهُ الرَّحْمَنُ بِالْإِسْرَاءِ وَبِعُرُوجِهِ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. The Merciful honored him with the night journey and with his ascent into the celestial realm. حَتَّى أَرَاهُ أَكْبَرَ الْآيَاتِ وَعَادَ بَعْدَ الْفَرْضِ لِلصَّلَاةِ. Even to the extent of revealing to him the greatest signs, and he returned from it with the obligatory prayer. So according to the hadith, he was in Mecca, and some say in the Hijr of Ismail, and other in the house. Aisha says that he was in the house, and she says that his bed was still warm. Now, she was not married to him at the time, but her riwayah, she would have heard that from somebody else. One of the things that you have to understand, this is something that about Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu. People say, and this is the Shia position, people say, how could he relate all of those hadiths? Because he relates almost 3,000 hadiths. How could he relate all those hadiths if he was only with the Prophet for 2.5 years? Abu Huraira was collecting hadith from Sahaba. Now, Sahaba do not have to say who they heard it from. They can just say, قال عن أبي هريرة قال رسول الله. Abu Huraira said, the Prophet said. So just because a Sahabi says something, it doesn't mean he heard it directly from the Prophet, but he is not obligated to say where he heard it. Now, when you get into the Tabi'een, they also do that. They'll cut off the Sahabi. They're called that's called mursal hadith. The marasil is when a tabi'i relates a hadith without mentioning the sahabi he heard it from. Now, some of the tabi'in have higher status than others, which is why Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, for instance, his mursal is accepted. Imam Malik accepts it. Abu Hanifa accepts it. Ahmed accepts it. Imam Shafi'i doesn't accept the mursal hadith. So this is a khilaf amongst the ulama. But the point is that if Aisha says his bed was warm, and then some people say, well, Aisha wasn't there, how would she know? Then she heard that from a sound source, maybe from the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he went on the Isra is, you have to believe in the Isra. The Mi'raj is ahad. The Isra is mutawatir. So the Isra, anybody that denies the Isra is, if you reject a mutawatir, it's considered like an excommunication. The Mi'raj is ahad hadith, but it's very, very strong. And so it's basically part of our belief, although it's not in the, if somebody doesn't believe it, that you don't say they're out of Islam, something like that. But it's very strong. The Prophet ﷺ went from Mecca to Jerusalem, and the Buraq, which is from Barq, light, he was traveling something akin to the speed of light, because it went from one horizon to the other in an instant, which is quite extraordinary. So it was obviously some... and the description of the Buraq, all of that is ما لا عين رأت ولا أذن سمعت ولا خطر على قلب بشر. It was now we know space travel. We have all these concepts of these things today. But whatever the Buraq was an extraordinary vehicle of transportation that was similar to a horse. And the Prophet ﷺ went to Jerusalem. He passed Musa alayhi salam. He saw him in the Kathib al-Ahmar in al-Bukhari, praying where he's buried. So he saw him praying in his grave, which is a proof that the prophets are alive in their graves, and they pray and do things in their graves. He saw him praying. When he got to Jerusalem, all of the messengers were assembled. He led them in prayer according to the tradition. Now, whether this was physical or a spiritual movement, the dominant opinion, and what I was taught, that it was physical. But there is an opinion that this was actually a ru'ya, that the Prophet ﷺ experienced this in another realm, that he wasn't physically moving through time and space like this. And certainly with the Mi'raj, it's not a physical movement in the sense of the Prophet ﷺ, God is not in time or space. So whatever happened, it's outside of human comprehension to understand that, which is why it's called the Sidrat al-Muntaha, the low tree of the furthest limit, which is that beyond which the intellect cannot grasp. It's supra-rational. So whatever happened to the Prophet ﷺ, we know that it's beyond our rational comprehension. But according to the tradition, he went through the heavens. He met different prophets at different points in his path through the heavens. At each heaven, there was an angel protecting the heaven. They had to take permission to come in. And at each place he saw wonders. But the Quran says, مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ وَمَا طَغَى, that his eye was not diverted by the wondrous things around him, nor did it go transgress. It didn't go like looking for more. The Prophet was singularly focused, and وَأَنَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ الْمُنْتَهَى, to your Lord is the end. So, and then the Quran says, قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, the Prophet ﷺ, according to the dominant belief that he was in the divine presence, that he saw his Lord in a vision that is not a vision of the eye by consensus. It's not something that the human eye sees. There was no light transmission. There was no time or space type of experience. But he saw his Lord. Aisha said that her hair stood on end whenever she heard anybody say the Prophet saw his Lord. But Ibn Abbas and others said he saw his Lord. How do you make tawafiq between the two? My belief is Aisha's does not negate the other one. My understanding is that what Aisha was saying was, it wasn't, don't think this was a physical, that he saw his Lord like. Now, if you look at the hadith, which is a sound hadith, they asked him, will we see our Lord? He said, you will see him like you see the moon on the full moon night. Well, what's extraordinary about the moon is it's reflected light. So there's some indication that the vision of God is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enable us to do that by the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses, in the same way that He has enabled us to see the moon. Without the sun, we would not see the moon. So, but we do see the moon. So this is and then also the fard prayer was given on that night. So Musa alayhi salam told the Prophet when he got 50 prayers, he said, go back. And some people have said, how is this idea of going back and forth? That's considered tashrif. You know, when you have direct access to a king, when you can go in and out, that's a sign of the maqam, of the station of the person, even in this world. You know, if you go see an emir, you go in one time, that's it. You better say what you need to say, because you can't say once you're out, oh, I need to go back in. The guy will say, make another appointment. So the idea of having that type of access is an indication of the maqam. But Musa was worried because he said his community had a hard time keeping up their prayers. And so in the end, the Prophet ﷺ was given 5 prayers, each with the equivalent of 10. So they have the reward of 50. So the 5 prayers that we do are like 50. And then it says, صلى عليه ربنا وسلم وآله وصحبه وكرم هجرته بيان هجرة النبي المختار والغزو والحج والاعتمار. Now for an elucidation of the migration of the chosen prophet, his battles and his hajj and the umrah. وهاجر المختار لما أن وصل 50 مع 3 حتى نزل. The chosen one migrated upon reaching 53 lunar years and alighted بطيبة الغراء حيث أمر ثم بها أقام حتى احتضر. So he, upon the city known as Tayba, this is one of the names of Medina. It has many names. One of the names is Tayba. One of the names is Muhajjar. One of the names is Miskina. There are countless names for the city. Yathrib, Athrib is one of the names. Bain al-Harratain. A whole bunch of names. It's a city that the Prophet ﷺ had a vision that he would make hijrah to a city that had date palms. And he originally thought it was Hajar, which is where Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi is from. Hajar is in the eastern province. It's a beautiful city. And of all the Arabian inhabitants, the people most like the people of Medina are the people of Hajar, which is now called Al-Ahsa. It's a beautiful city. I've been there many, many times. And the Prophet ﷺ did not go there, but the people of Abdul Qais, because they're people of the Wafd Abdul Qais, and they're also, the people there are the only people other than the Banu Qayla and the Qahtan people of Yemen that became Muslim without any objection. All the other Arabs opposed the Prophet ﷺ and eventually began to come into Islam. After trying to eliminate the Prophet ﷺ, they eventually gave up trying to kill him and ended up in Amal Wufud especially, just came in large numbers. But the people that really entered into Islam willingly, without any resistance, were these 3 groups. The people of Tayba, the people of Hajar, and the people of Yemen. And all of them share the fact that they're Yemenis, which is why the Prophet said, Al-Imanu Yamani, that faith is from Yemen, because they really were the people that just believed in the Prophet ﷺ without any difficulty. So he came to Tayyiba al-Gharra, this radiant city, as he was divinely commanded. Now we know, and Shaykh Abdullah has been doing the Tariq al-Hijrah, so I'm not going to go over but there were many, many extraordinary signs. The Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ is the turning point in Islam. It's the reason why Umar radiallahu anhu put the Hijrah at year 1 of Islam. So time in Islam begins with Hijrah. That your life begins with your internal Hijrah to God. That's really when your life begins. Before that, that's it. When you make that Hijrah to Allah. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Surely actions are by the niyyah, which is from Noah. You know, it's the seed. Your niyyah is what comes out of the heart. And so he said, فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Whose ever hijrah is to God and His Messenger, his hijrah is to God and His Messenger. It's what was in your heart. وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ إِمْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. It's an amazing hadith in many ways. It's the hadith that many of the ulama begin their books with because it's singular importance in our tradition. But when the Prophet ﷺ said, your hijrah is to Allah and His Messenger, he repeated it again. So whoever's hijrah is to Allah and His Messenger, then his hijrah is to Allah and His Messenger. And then he said, but if his hijrah is for dunya, some worldly gain, or a spouse that they want to obtain, then their hijrah is to what they made hijrah to. Ma hajra. He didn't say ila dunya, ila imra. No. It's not even worth mentioning again. If that, and that gets back to what we talked about earlier about high and low aspiration. That the high aspiration is something honored, and the low aspiration is something that is of the dunya, the lowest thing in the world. فيها فكانت أشرف البقاع أما ضريحه فبالإجماع. Hence it became the most sacred place on earth. This is the opinion of Imam Malik radiallahu anhu. Imam al-Lamati is a Maliki. The Maliki believe that Medina is the most sacred place in the world. It actually is more blessed than even Mecca. This is the Maliki position. The other three Imams say no. And they use the hadith about the Prophet ﷺ said that the prayer in my masjid is خير من ألف في غيري إلا مسجد الحرام. That prayer in my masjid is better than 1,000 prayers in another place except for the Masjid al-Haram, the mosque in Mecca. And then the Bayt al-Maqdis is 500, 1,000. These are indications of the immense blessing of praying in a place that has been sanctified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Prophet ﷺ said, جُعِلَتْ لِي الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا. The whole earth was made a masjid for me, so there's a blessing wherever you pray. But these places have a special sanctity that I think many of you, inshallah, can feel when you go into the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. And there is a clear sakina that you should experience. The closer you get to the Prophet ﷺ, the stronger that sakina gets. And the more open your heart is to that sakina, the more that you'll feel that sakina. The dhikr is like the drop of water on the rock. There's a place in New Mexico called Dar al-Islam. Does anybody know that place? It's a madrasa that was built up in the mountains, and I've been going there for many years. But there's a little spout. It rains quite a bit up there. There's a spout that drops down on this brick pathway outside the masjid. And I've been watching it for years get deeper and deeper. Every time I go back, I see it's had more of an effect. And that is the effect of dhikr on the heart. There's people that do dhikr and they don't think they're getting anything from it, because it's like that drop on the heart. It takes a very long time for dhikr to really penetrate. Now, some people's hearts are more open than other people's hearts. That's just something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us different spiritual capabilities. Some people have dreams. They're more open to the dream world. Some people don't have any dreams. I'm sure some of you know people that are always having amazing dreams. There are people like that. They're just more open. And that's a certain type. It's just like people can sing and people can't sing. There are also spiritual gifts that people have. And there's people that have sixth sense, that are very intuitive. Women tend to be more intuitive than men. Women tend to get a better sense of people than men have. They might not be as attuned to the type of just of what's in front of them, really. So even Ma'bad, I don't know if Shaykh Abdullah mentioned this to you about the description of Ma'bad. Did you talk about that? Because Ma'bad, she saw things about the Prophet nobody saw. I mean, her description of the Prophet is unique. So, and she said when she was asked about it that women look at things differently from men. Well, anybody who's ever been married, for the men over there, you kind of should listen to your wives. So then he says, فيها كان أما ضريحه فبالإجماع. As for his actual tomb, the tomb, it's by consensus. The Prophet ﷺ's tomb is by consensus better than any place in the universe. This is in the Shifa of Qadi Iyad. He said this is the ijma' of the ummah, that the actual place that holds his body is the most sacred space in the whole world, and we believe that. So all of the imams agree on that. But the Kaaba itself, there are people that say after that the Kaaba, and even the Malikis say the Kaaba. Some will say the other graves of the prophets, wherever they are. And then he said, مُدَّةَ اللُّبْثِ بِهَا فِي الْعِدَّةِ عَشْرُ سِنِينَ يَا لَهَا مِنْ مُدَّةِ. The extent of his sojourn in that city was 10 lunar years, and what joyous years they were. They were extraordinary years. لَقَدْ غَزَّ 20 بَعْدَ 5 فِيهَا وَفِي 7 بِغَيْرِ رَبْسِ. He led 25 military expeditions and actually fought in 7 without a doubt. There's a khilaf about that. Some say it was 24, some say it was 28. Al-Lamati says it was 25. The Prophet ﷺ had saraya. The saraya are expeditions that he sent people out on. The ba'ath was also, he had reconnoitering expeditions where he sent people out to look. The important thing to understand about this period is that the Prophet ﷺ was given, once he established a baydah, which is like the capital, he had a base that was a political entity. He had political authority. He was brought into Medina as a political head. And this is why it's very important to understand the difference between Mecca and Medina is the difference between the roles that the Prophet ﷺ now was addressing. In Mecca, his role was purely as a da'iyah. He was calling to God. He had no political role in Mecca, none. And this is why he never went against the status quo. You do not see him ever threatening them. He never undermined anything. There was no civil strife. The Muslims were commanded to bear patiently any aggression against them. They were not even allowed to hit back. So this was a turn your other cheek phase for 13 years. When he moved to Medina, he moves into a very different role. He is now a political leader. he's a military leader also. He now has an army of people. And these were Arabs. They were ready to fight and die for him. And he was sanctioned now to defend himself. This is what he was given sanction to do. If they aggress on you, أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَ. God gave permission to those who were oppressed because they're being fought and aggressed upon. Now, also important to remember, this was serious. These people were out to exterminate, and they use that word, exterminate. So when you read that the Prophet ﷺ had Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf assassinated, Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf was like Goebbels. I mean, I don't think it's an odious analogy. The only difference is in numbers. But he was a minister of propaganda. He was writing poems that were to the Arabs like radio broadcasts. In the Serbian situation, the aggression started from, same with in Rwanda, the same thing. It was through radio broadcasts. They were telling people the Muslims were raping Serbian women. It was all lies. But the Serbians went crazy because they were hearing these lies on the radio. So they went and they started raping the Muslim women and killing Muslims. But they were fooled. They were completely duped. And this is what Iblis does. So this is what Ka'b al-Ashraf was doing. He was writing all of these wretched things, calling on the Arabs, appealing to their worst nature, to their arrogance, appealing to their jahili pride, and really calling to come and finish them off. That's what he was asking them to do. And the Prophet ﷺ said, who will relieve us of this man? Because he was having this immense impact. So it's important to know the Prophet ﷺ was not in any way a belligerent person. He was not militant by nature. He was actually quite the opposite. He was a very gentle person. He always preferred diplomatic means to resolve things, and we see this many, many times in the Seerah. He also, if you look, in his 23 years, less than 1,000 people died in total. So all of these battles were not like we see today, where in one day that number happens or more. It was a very different time. They were very chivalrous people. They honored chivalry. They fought face to face. They confronted on the battle. They did not attack women and children. The Prophet ﷺ, when they found the dead woman, the Sahaba were looking at it and at this woman who had died in a battle, and the Prophet ﷺ asked what had happened, and Khalid ibn Walid, this was very late at Ta'if, Khalid ibn Walid had killed a woman, and the Prophet ﷺ said, go and tell Khalid, Naha Rasulullah ﷺ an qatl al-nisa'i wal-awladi wal-asif, that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited killing women, children, or servants, domestic servants. Now what that means in our language in modern times is non-combatants, because in the Arab world, the man, any man who was young, he had a sword and he was expected to defend like a militia. So when the Prophet ﷺ said that, and that hadith, by the way, is mutawatir in different variations. There's over 50 Sahaba that narrate that hadith. So that hadith has the weight of the Quran, which is why Abu Hanifa would not even kill in his madhab, for apostasy, he would not kill a woman because of that prohibition. Because he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, don't kill women. So even if a woman left Islam, Abu Hanifa said, they're not killed. So it's important to understand that the Prophet ﷺ did not in any way, shape, or form advocate war. In Sahih al-Bukhari, he said, "La tatamannaw liqa al-adu." Do not hope to meet your enemies. Don't desire that. وَلَكِنْ نَسْأَلَ اللَّهَ الْعَافِيَةَ. But ask God for well-being, for safety, for security. And then he said, but if you have to meet them, فَاثْبُتُوا وَإِن لَقِيتُمُوهُمْ فَاثْبُتُوا. But if you do meet them, if you're forced to meet them, be courageous. Be brave people. Be steadfast. So he was fighting because these people were trying to eliminate him. And this is why Karen Armstrong, I think, did such an extraordinary job in that book, A Prophet for Our Time, Muhammad, A Prophet for Our Time, because I think what Karen Armstrong, and she says this in the outset, that it was very disturbing to her to see the Prophet denigrated, the way he was being denigrated as a militant prophet, when she said, this is a man who spent his entire life trying to solve the problem of human conflict. This is what he was born into, a society of cycles of violence that were unending. A tribe would kill somebody, and suddenly right at the time that he was coming into adulthood, there had been a war that lasted 40 years over a horse race. This was the Arabian Peninsula. 40 years over a horse race. And they even call it Harbu Dahis wa Ghabra. We even know the names of the horses between the Abs and the Dhibyan. 40 years. The man that started the war ended up becoming a monk because he said he could not bear he couldn't bear to look at the faces of his tribesmen, knowing the harm that he had inflicted and the pain and suffering that he had inflicted on all the people that died in that war. Haram ibn Sinan, who's celebrated by Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, the father of Ka'b ibn Zuhair, who praised the Prophet ﷺ. This is what the Arabs, this is what they were living. He wrote his great Mu'allaqa in praise of the men that ended this war by paying all the diyat of these people just to bring this thing to an end. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ was. He was fighting to end these ridiculous cycles of violence that were endemic in this part of the world. And that's why it's particularly disturbing to see Muslims fighting amongst each other and killing each other in the name of his religion. And he said, لا ترجعوا بعد كفارا يضرب بعضكم رقاب بعض. Do not return as ingrates, because the ulama say it doesn't mean kuffar, disbelievers. Ingrates of the blessing of Allah that He united you. Don't become ingrates after this by striking the necks of one another. So when you read that he fought these, it's important to note that this was forced upon the Prophet ﷺ. He fought in 7 of them. He was an incredibly brave person at the age of 15. He was in the Harb al-Fijar, where he picked up arrows because he wasn't old enough to fight, but he picked up the arrows because the Arabs, they would shoot the arrows and then they would use the arrows and shoot them back because arrows were expensive, difficult to make. And so he says, قاتل there should be a fa there. قاتل في بدر أحد والخندق بني قريظة بن المصطلق. Pretty sure there's a Okay, so it's, yeah. It's معطوف على الفي from before. So it's actually قاتل, and then the reason that's majrur for people that are studying Arabic grammar is it's معطوف على في سبع. So قاتل, so فيها وفي سبع بغير لبس قاتل بدر أحد. So it's معطوف على وفي سبع. That's why. So it's not قاتل like بدران or something like that. So قاتل بدر أحد والخندق بني قريظة بني المصطلق وغزوة الطائف مع حنين وضعفها البعوث دون مين وقيل في النضير مع وادي القرى قاتل والغابة أيضا ذكر وحج حجتين ثم الفرض واعتمر الأربع قالوا أيضا وقال مالك ثلاثا اعتمر وحج مفردا فحقق الخبر. So he says that the Prophet ﷺ fought in 7: Badr, Uhud, Al-Khandaq, Bani Qurayza, and Bani al-Mustalaq. He fought in all of these, as well as the battle of Ta'if and that of Hunayn. And double that number to 54 to include the sorties, forays, and raids. So in the Saraya, the Ba'uth, also. And then also it's been opined that he fought at Nadir, as well as battles of Wadi al-Qura and Ghaba. So there's a khilaf about those. He made 2 pilgrimages while in Mecca, and then the obligatory Hajj from Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ, he did twice before it was actually fard. So they were not the Hajj of Islam in that way, the fard. And then he made his fard Hajj, and he did 4 Umrah altogether. Never in 1 year, which is why for Malikis here, Imam Malik, it was makruh to do Umrah more than once in a year. So Imam Malik's madhab is only because the Prophet never did it twice, and his view was when he was in Mecca, if it was a good thing, he would have done it more than once. But that's a khilaf position. The other Imams differ on that. The Hajj that he performed is the Hajj al-Mufrid, Hajj al-Ifrad, which is where you don't actually sacrifice. Imam Malik considered it the best Hajj. Qiran and Tamattu' are the other 2 types of Hajj. The reason Malik considered it the best was because the Ifrad you don't owe blood. The others you owe blood, and blood is owed for something deficient. So he saw it as naqs in the Hajj. Now, there are all 3 Hajjs have proofs, which is, I think, one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, that the same Hajj, people saw him do different types of Hajj, which is a rahmah for his ummah. He did Tamattu', he did Qiran, and he did Ifrad in the same Hajj. And people witnessed him doing this. So, وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ بِعَزِيزٍ. If you know who God is, nothing should surprise you. You know, I mean, one of the things, I love Abu Bakr's answer when the Quraysh came and just said, do you know what he said last night? And they said, what? He said he went to Jerusalem last night and came back. And then they said, that's a journey that takes us a month. And Abu Bakr said, in qadahu faqad sadaq. If he said it, it's true. In other words, I don't necessarily believe you guys telling me that he said it, but if he did say it, it's true. And his reasoning is actually it makes sense, because he said, I believe something even more extraordinary than that, which is that God's communicating to him. That's more extraordinary. Once you accept that, everything else just falls in place. So, the Prophet ﷺ, he preferred, Imam Malik radiallahu anhu preferred that one did Ifrad, but the other 2 are, I think Abu Hanifa actually, it's Tamattu'. Do people know the Hanafi method? Anybody? Is it Tamattu'? Yeah, they do Tamattu' because of the Hajji, bringing the Hajji, and also getting out of the Ihram in Mecca. And then Shafi'i is the Qiran, I think. Is anybody Shafi'i here? Anybody? You can ask Shaykh Abdullah. Anyway. So, وَكُلُّهُنَّ كُنَّ فِي ذِي الْقِعْدَةِ عَلَى الَّذِي صَحَّهُ مَنْ عَدَّ. All of his umrahs were in Dhul Qa'dah. So Imam Malik he did not make umrah during Hajj, which is the Qiran, where you make Hajj and umrah. Imam Malik said no. He went with the hadith that said the ifrad, and he considered the others of less, they weren't as strong. So, and they're ahad. So it's important. You should know the difference between ahad narrations, right? Ahad, there's not enough to reach the level of tawatur. So ahad hadith is dun mutawatir. Whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 narration, have degrees of strength. So you have the sahih, and then you have sahih ala shart al-shaykhain. You have the sahih, that the 6 collections all narrate it. So they're stronger based on who relates them and how many relate them. What time is it now? 6 what? Okay. So, any questions? تفضل. You mean the ones that left Islam? All the Sahaba believed it. Oh yeah. I mean, that's the only response I know of. But they all believed it. Yeah. So, there are a few people that are no longer, they weren't considered Sahaba that left Islam. But they were weak people. I mean, some of them might have come back later, but they lose the status of Sahabi. Because there were Arabs, a lot of Arabs committed apostasy. I mean, a lot of them they were very loose affiliation to Islam initially. And the Prophet ﷺ understood that. Faith is not something, faith grows in people. Some people have strong faith and other people have weaker faith, and that's like anything. So the Muli al-Arabi al-Darqawi has a very beautiful statement in his Rasail. He says, if Islam comes to you as a mountain and you embrace it as a mountain, it will always be a mountain for you. But if it comes to you as a mountain and you reject it, and then later it comes to you as a cow, and you embrace it, it'll always be a cow for you. So, وَالنَّبِيبُ بِالْإِشَارَةِ يَفْهَمْ. It's kind of a riddle, but that's very true. I mean, that's how Islam came to me. It came like a mountain, and I embraced it as a mountain, and it's always seemed like a mountain to me. Yeah. But I know other people that thought about Islam for like 20 years. Literally, just thought about it. Like, should I become Muslim? For me, it wasn't really like a choice. It was like, this is the truth, and if I reject it, I think I'm going to be in trouble. That's how I felt. Mm-hmm.
Regarding Masjid Nabawi, can you tell us if there is any difference or any regarding the original boundaries and then the new building?
I don't know if we're going to get an opportunity. In the past we've had an opportunity to go in the night to look at the boundaries. But the boundaries are demarcated by signs that the Ottomans left. The reason the pillars are not straight in the very old Ottoman masjid that's still there, the pillars aren't aligned, is because they're where the original palm trees were. So they preserved those places. So don't think it was just bad. They were great architects, but they wanted to preserve exactly where the original pillars of the Prophet ﷺ's mosque. The Rawda is the green carpet, and then you'll also see the Ustawanat they tell you what they are. Ustawanat Aisha, you'll see where the Ustawanat al-Wufud, you'll see where the Prophet ﷺ used to meet the Ufud. That's where Imam Malik used to teach also. There's also the Sayyidina Uthman's extensions. You can see where that goes to. They're marked by a green up on the pillars. So it's all very well known where everything is. We know the pillar where the original Qibla was, facing Jerusalem, is in the back. And then, the Hujarat are there. The Ghurfat of Fatima is there. The Kocha of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that place is known also. The different houses of the Sahaba, the Abar that were now part of the masjid that were originally there, like Bi'ruha is there. There's a circle for where the Bi'r was, so the people that built this left marks for that. The place where Sayyidina Uthman is killed is just outside of the Prophet ﷺ's Bab, where you go, that Bab Jibril, where you go out. If you turn immediately to the right, there's a marble square there, which is where Sayyidina Uthman was killed. It's, alhamdulillah, it's all very well known what was the original. And then this
question was, because when the Prophet says, in my
Masjid
masjid,
Hada. Well, not,
regarding blessings and whatnot.
no, the whole masjid, alhamdulillah. The whole masjid goes under that, because whatever is extended of the original masjid has the hukum of the original masjid, without any doubt. There's obviously more of a blessing in the Rawda, because there's a khilaf about whether it's haqiqa or majaz, but most of the ulama say it's haqiqa, that the Rawda, and haqiqa and majaz is literal or metaphorical. Whether it literally means it's in paradise or it's a majaz, it's like paradise. And the dominant opinion is that is a literal space in paradise. So if you're in that where the green carpets are, that's considered the Rawda. And he said, Ma baina qabri and fi riwaya bayti, my house and my grave is Rawdatun min riyad al-Jannah. Ma baina bayti wa mimbari, my mimbar. And the first mimbar is the Prophet's mimbar. The second one is Uthman radiallahu anhu. And also the Mukhallaqa is there, where the Jada' al-Hanin al-Jada', where the palm trunk moaned. And that is mutawatir. That hadith is mutawatir. So that miracle is factual. I mean, some of the miracles they're highly probable, because they're ahad, so we believe in them, but they're not points of creed. Whereas that one is actually a point of creed, because so many Sahaba witnessed that and narrated it, that they heard the palm tree moan, and it shook the masjid when the Prophet ﷺ stopped speaking at that place. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that the Arabs part of the Prophet were Russians people and Protestants that women should not be killed
Yeah.
in the war situation. And that you took from that for apostasy, women are to be killed.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there a connection between war and apostasy such that it's particularly heinous in war to commit apostasy?
Yeah.
Is there a connection?
Well, that's a modern. That's a lot. Some of the modern ulama, like Tahir Jabir Alwani, that's his position. He wrote a little book on it. That apostasy is really more like treason. That's why the punishment was there. Apostasy the pre-modern world. Apostasy was the norm. If you were in a religion, you chose to leave it. Pretty much it was a death sentence. So the Jews have apostasy laws. Christianity followed Judaism, so that would have been Jesus' position. But their apostasy laws came through the church. So they had apostasy laws. So it was, I mean, I don't think modern people now, you know, those are ahkam sultaniyah. And it's important to remember, the Prophet ﷺ said in a sound hadith, لَتَنْقَضِيَنَّ عُرَى الْإِسْلَامِ عُرْوَةً عُرْوَةً. The rungs of Islam, so to speak. I mean, urwa is really what you hold on to, but those placeholders of Islam are going to go one by one. And he said, كُلُّ مَا تَنْقَضِي عُرْوَةٌ يَتَشَبَّثَ النَّاسُ بَالَّتِي تَرِيهَا. Every time one of those holding places goes, people will cling to the next one. And he said, أَوَّلُهَا, you know, the first one, أَوَّلُهَا, intiqadan is al-hukmu. The first thing to go will be governance. And the last thing to go will be prayer. So the idea that Islamic law is coming back is a modern fantasy. You know, this kind of idea that some of these Islamic movements have put out there, we need to reestablish Sharia. You're going to apply Sharia in the modern world. You know, you create consumer societies, put false desires into people, and then you're going to, you know, cut off their hands when they steal things. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. So I'm not an advocate of re-implementation of hudud and all these things. I think it's long gone. It's been long gone. And the Prophet ﷺ said the sign of jahiliyyah is when you implement on weak people and leave the strong people. Well, if that's not the modern world, I don't know what is. So just to have these superficial, you know, implementations of had punishment and say we're establishing Sharia, that's not Sharia. Sharia is creating social justice, is creating an environment of brotherhood and love where people actually take care of each other. And then in that situation where people break those social trusts and bonds, yeah, there should be harsh punishments. But even in the harsh punishments, if you look at Sharia, you know, Sayyidina Umar caught a man stealing once. And he said, and this is sound, he said, "Did you steal? Say no." And the man said no. And he said, "Get out of here." Wallahi. You know, they've got this fantasy that these people were these bloodthirsty. They wanted to protect people, to hide them. In Maliki madhab, for adultery, if a woman becomes pregnant, you're supposed to ask her, the qadi is supposed to say, "Did you go to the hammam? Did you use a washcloth that somebody had used before?" You know, like inseminating herself. "Did you swim in a pool that a man had swum?" You know, it's like trying to find excuses for people. It's not, and then also if your own daughter got pregnant, you're supposed to veil her. You're not supposed to kill her. You're supposed to veil her. What they used to do is they would keep them in the house, give birth, and then they would actually attribute the child to themselves. I mean, that's rahmah. This other thing is very alien. I don't know what's happened to people personally. I really don't. I don't know what happened to people. But all this harshness, and it has nothing to do with the Sharia of the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, his Sharia was mercy. And the had punishments are real, and I believe in them. It's not like I don't believe in them, so don't get me wrong. But I do believe that they have been grossly misinterpreted, and I also believe that implementation of them in the current social conditions would be a grave injustice. That's my personal opinion. You can take that or leave it. So I think this is about, when you turn to Allah, if your life begins at hijrah, then you'll not be taking into account for what's before. I mean, you're taking into account, if you know right and wrong, you're taking into account. If you don't know right and wrong, you're not taken into account. So it just depends on your knowledge. Your responsibility is based on your knowledge. There's people that weren't ever taught anything, and then when they find out, they adhere to it. But if you were not a Muslim and you became a Muslim, al-Islam yajubbu ma qablahu, like the Prophet ﷺ said, Islam removes what went before it except for debt. So your debt obligations to others is still binding with Islam, but everything else is removed. Yeah. About the Prophet ﷺ being 4 or 6 years old when his mother died, there's khilaf about that. So you'll get some khilaf about those narrations. I was told the Prophet ﷺ never killed anyone on the battlefield, but was told narration. He only killed one person, and he actually, he told, the man said, "Sa'aqtuluka," and the Prophet ﷺ said, "Bal ana qatiluka," no, I'm going to kill you. And then at Uhud, the Prophet threw a stone that hit him right in the neck, just because he had armor on, and it went through the armor and hit him. And the whole way back, he's telling the Quraysh, "He killed me, qatalani Muhammad." They all were laughing at him. He's like, "There's nothing. He didn't do anything." He said, "No, he doesn't lie. He said he was going to kill me," and he ended up dying at Serif, the same place we visited. Yeah. So, but other than that, the Prophet never shed blood. It's because he didn't spill blood. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I think with people, inshallah, need to get ready for the prayer. Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khairan. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على حبيبنا سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.